And that's how factions are formed. In just 6 simple steps, you'll have your own detailed faction, plus there's a PDF template to help you out. I'm the Alpine DM, let's get to it. Real quick, what even is a faction? Essentially, it is a structured group or organization that shares a common set of beliefs and values and has a similar goal. Step 1, determine values. The most important thing when creating a faction is to figure out what are the core values of the group. Overall, what do they believe and what are they trying to achieve together? You could also think of this as defining the mission statement of the faction. Try to answer the question, what purpose does this faction serve within the world? One faction might value bravery and justice, while another faction could value wealth and information. Brainstorm 2 or 3 different values for the faction and then come up with a mission statement for them using the following template. This faction seeks to purpose through value 1, value 2, and value 3. I'm going to be making a faction along with you so you can see how easy it is and kind of see how it develops from an idea into a full-blown faction for your world. So here's what my faction's mission statement would be. This faction seeks to preserve the moon's ecosystem and prevent the destruction of nature through education and vigilance. Step 2, name your faction. The next step is to pick out a name for your faction, and I think this is one of the more fun parts where it really gives a lot of flavor and helps people visualize what your faction is all about. The one thing you really should do is try to pick out a name that has something to do with the values and the mission statement that you came up with, so it's related in some way or another. Ideally, you want to pick out a name that instantly evokes an image and a feeling of everything that your faction represents. But aside from that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. The most effective and basic format for naming your faction is adjective plus noun, and it seems really simple because it is, but there's nothing wrong with that at all. Here's a few different examples of kind of tropes that you can play with this format. Real quick, thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying the video, please consider subscribing. It really helps me pursue my dream of being a full-time writer, and it helps the video get recommended to other people who are going to find value out of it. Thanks, that's all. For a combat or a warrior type focused faction, you can pick a color and a weapon name. So examples could be silver spears, black daggers, or hammers of rust. A slightly different approach you can use is directly acknowledge that it is a faction or a group in the name itself by describing how it's organized, kinda. And this can be done through the format X of Y, where X is the group structure word and Y is related to its purpose, people, or location. So some group structure words: brotherhood, council, ministry, bard, union, alliance, club, guild, order, cult, church, lodge, league, society. You get the idea. So your faction could be named the Brotherhood of Traveling Alchemists or Council of the Northern Mages. So with both of these names, you can see it actually just tells you outright that it is a group, it is a faction of organized people coming together with a similar goal. And sometimes names like this could be a little bit longer, so you might want to think about using an acronym. So Brotherhood of the Traveling Alchemists could turn into BOTA. Other factions, like musicians, may choose to use a single name, so mononyms. And I think these are a good exception to the rule of keeping the name related to the faction. If you have a mononym, it can be a little bit more mysterious and invokes sense of intrigue and mystery and wonder. So a few examples could be archivists, equinox, or Iker. And so now for my example faction, I want to pick out a name that represents people trying to protect nature sort of through any means necessary. And I ended up going with the name Lunar Wardens. A few other options could have been Guardians of Elysium, Tempest, or The Last Wall. And you can see how each of these still conveys a similar sense of trying to protect nature, but they each kind of have their own little twist or slightly different focus. So for your faction, try to come up with 5 different name options using a combination of the techniques in step 2 and pick whichever one you like the most, and you can always change your mind later. Step 3, consider the structure. As a gamer, one of my favorite parts of an RPG is joining a guild and being able to work your way through the different tiers and ranks in that guild, getting better access to items, having more perks, and of course, bearing more responsibility and going on cooler quests. This step is going to be a little bit more crunchy than some of the others, but it's where you can come up with a lot of unique flavor that really helps define and shape your faction. First, you need to think about how your faction is organized, and another way to think about this is how is power and responsibility dispersed throughout your faction. In a pyramid hierarchy of your faction, you're going to have one leader at the top, and they'll probably have a couple people who report to them directly, and each of those people are going to have a couple more people who report to them, and etc., going down. But as you can see, all the power comes together to appoint one person at the top. Or your faction might have shared responsibility where there are several people who make up a council that makes all the big important decisions. These people could each be a leader in a various aspect or branch of the faction. So you might have a leader of commerce and a leader of war and a leader of culture. And these people make up the council, again, voting on decisions, each representing a different facet of the faction. It's also worth considering how leaders are chosen. Are they voted upon? Do they fight each other for positions like pirate queens? Is there a point and merit system? Or maybe it is a bloodline heir. Any of these is valid, and there's plenty more. So just think about this. How are leaders chosen? For the Lunar Wardens, I'm gonna have 4 members or leaders who make up the Council of Ancient Wisdom. Each one of these leaders is fully in charge of their own branch of the faction, which oversees different logistical things. These branches are land, water, plants, and animals. So you can see even the branches, the internal structure of the organization is again related to the theme. It still has the symbolism built in automatically. Next, you want to come up with different ranks that the players are going to be able to progress through as they do more and more quests with the faction and gain a better reputation with members of the faction. There's no right or wrong number of traits to have, but I think 5 is a really good sweet spot, plus 1 as like rank 0 kind of initiate or pre-member status. For the ranks, try to come up with names for each of the tiers that shows very easy progression from one to the other. You don't have to think about it, and with names that fit in the theme and purpose of your faction. So for example, with the Lunar Wardens, I'm gonna tie their ranks loosely to kind of the growth of plants, and you'll see the progression that way. So you start off as a Seed Watcher, then you move to Root Guard, Sprout Shield, Arboreal Champion, and finally Bloom Reaper, which is just awesome. Oh no, my blue light went out. Oh dang. Anyway, ranks. Make them sound cool. Step 4, Fluff It Up. This step is all about coming up with different things that are just very flavorful and kind of fluff or lore for your faction. So they could be fun, but not super important. So feel free if you want to skip this step, it's totally okay. But it's more fun to include it. So this could be a symbol or logo, any color scheme, mascot, or mottos that your faction has. For your symbol, I think it's really helpful to think about modern day logos. For the most part, they are very simple and instantly recognizable, and that's what you want for your faction. And if you're able to relate it to the theme or the values of the business or faction in this case, even better. The Lunar Warden's symbol is a crescent moon with a sword through it, which is not original or completely unique by any means. It's very simple, but it shows exactly what the purpose is. There's a moon, they protect the moon. There's a sword, that's what they protect it with. It's like, genius. If you're gonna have a motto, you wanna keep it short and punchy. It's just a couple of words, but it immediately ties your brain to the image of that idea. The colors can be literally whatever you want, but this is going to be used on stuff like uniforms or flags or, you know, different weapon colors, just anything like that. If your faction has an animal mascot, consider any symbolism that already exists for these animals. So Owls tend to be seen as wise, and foxes are cunning. Step 5, fill it out. Alright, next it's time to get a few more concrete details in place for your faction. In this step, I'm going to focus on things that will actually be useful during gameplay. So this could include important NPCs, different responsibilities or quests for the different ranks and tiers, and of course perks that could be gained as well. For the important NPCs, you can come up with as many or as few as you like, but I think it's a really good idea to come up with at least 2. One of these is going to be the leader or a leader, depending how your faction is organized, of the faction to act as kind of the face of the faction and the big decision maker. Players probably won't interact with them very much at the beginning. And the other NPC you should make is more of a recruiter or a lower tier person in charge. And this will be the person who starts off introducing them to the faction, giving them quests, showing them around, that kind of thing. And if you want tips on actually creating memorable, unique NPCs, I've done a whole video on it, so you can find that in the description. And coming up with NPCs, you can start off fairly basic and just kind of have a general description of the NPC, and as needed, fill in more details. So here's a short example for the Lunar Wardens. Coco Turnipseed is a bright-eyed halfling with loads of optimism and the determination and work ethic to match it. She is responsible for training a small team of seed watchers, though she spends most of her time caring for animals. So just like that, just 2 to 3 sentences is a great starting point, and you can always come up with more when you need it. Responsibilities, quests, and perks. Take a moment to consider the different responsibilities that members of your faction will have at different tiers or ranks. For each tier, try coming up with an example quest or mission that a player of that rank would get sent on. It doesn't need to be detailed at all, it can be really more just of a loose guideline, like the Pirate's Code. So here's an example for the Lunar Wardens, where you can see they start off deterring loggers and miners and progress their way to infiltrating fur camps, raising villages, and exploding bridges that connect to society. Again, you want to have a kind of sense of progression where it's very clear as the higher ranks they get, the more serious and important the missions are that they go on. Likewise, a huge part of increasing rank in a faction and getting more responsibility is the awesome perks that come with it. Again, try to come up with a few different possible perks or rewards that would be available to members at each of the different tier levels or ranks. And this could be better weapons, cheaper potions, or information. And eventually they might get specialized training, magic, awesome items, or even mounts. Step 6. What is their place in the world? The final step is to figure out your faction's metaphorical and physical place in the world. First, consider their relationship with other factions and the social dynamics that exist because of your faction. Are they on good terms with them? Are they sworn enemies? Do they have a tenuous alliance where they're secretly still trying to sabotage each other? You'll also want to think about the relationship that your faction has with local governments or different authorities. Your faction could be held in very high regard and work closely with the government, or if your faction has ideas in opposition to the current government, then maybe the crown doesn't even acknowledge that they officially exist as a faction. In a similar manner, you want to think about how people in your faction view members of the public, and vice versa, how members of the public view people in your faction. If people in your faction are walking through the center of a town, what would the response be by members of public? Are they approached as heroes, or do citizens avert their eyes in fear and not dare directly address them? Or maybe they're completely exiled from town and not welcome at all. Just think about different things like this and how people would react to your players being in this faction. A huge point to consider is the precious resources in your world. What resources does the faction have access to, and what resources do they seek to gain if they don't have them? Think about some of your faction's main objectives within the world and what resources they would need or want to help them accomplish those goals. Next up is the physical place in the world, and depending how your faction is organized, they could have one large central headquarters or a bunch of smaller hubs kind of dispersed throughout the continent, more than likely it's going to be a combination of the two somewhere along that spectrum. Exactly how you want to do this will depend on how you prefer to prepare for your sessions, but worst case scenario, a few bullet points will do a pretty good job. You want to think about, does this location have a special name? How can you get there? I'm assuming you probably can't just walk in. Is there a secret code or passageway or a magic little trinket that allows you access to it? What defenses and protections does it have? And does it have any unique properties or aspects? So for the Lunar Warden's headquarters, here's a couple bullet points that I came up with just as a starting point to help me flesh out kind of their main HQ. It is known as the Grove, and it is deep in an old growth forest. Buildings are magically carved and formed from trees and massive roots coming together. There is lush, blooming flowers and vines everywhere. Walking through the grove is like walking through a massive garden. Through the middle of the grove is a huge river that is always ice cold and pristine and clean. Archers and guards patrol unseen from the forest canopy above. So now you can come up with a few bullet points for your faction. Thank you for watching. Go out, build your faction. Tell me, what other kind of videos do you want to see from me?